So our guest on For Your Inner Guru is Mark Coleman. Mark is the author of From Suffering to Peace, Make Peace with Your Mind, and Awake in the Wild. He's the founder of the Mindfulness Institute and has an MA in clinical psychology. Mark has guided students on 5 continents as a corporate consultant, counselor, meditation teacher, and wilderness guide. Mark, welcome to For Your Inner Guru.
Thank you, Laura. Very nice to be here. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I was so excited when your book came into my awareness. It's the long title is From Suffering to Peace, The True Promise of Mindfulness. Could we start with you sharing what you mean by the true promise? It infers that there's a truth here that you want to bring into the world.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting title because I'm actually, as we discussed a little earlier, I'm writing the book partly in a somewhat opposition to the over-promising of mindfulness. So it's funny that I have the word promise in there because I do think there's a lot of over-promising. Mindfulness has exploded, as you know, and it's been touted as a panacea for anything from headaches to weight loss to ADD to, or you name it. It's somebody saying, oh, it's good for this, and it is good for many, many things, and that's why it is so popular and making its way into every part of society. But when anything becomes so popular so quickly as mindfulness has become, there's a tendency to, especially in the media, to want to bite-size it and make it packageable, commodify it, and scale it. And to do that, you have to simplify it and reduce its, and the depth and the complexity and the richness. And so I've been teaching in the mindfulness world, both in traditional meditation settings and in, corporate and healthcare and every sector there is. And I've been concerned at the reducing of mindfulness either to focus or to simply attention or to being non-judgmental, and they're all elements of mindfulness. But the real promise of mindfulness, the point of why these practices were developed for thousands of years and still very alive in the contemplative traditions, is that mindful awareness allows us to know ourselves fully, allows us to understand the causes of suffering and how to free ourselves from suffering, and the causes of happiness and how to find genuine lasting peace in the midst of our lives. And so the book's intention was really, how do I speak to the depth and the scope of this beautiful practice, and yet also make it accessible to the layperson. So that's really the intention of the book. And the promise is that mindfulness is a path of awareness that cultivates understanding, insight, that allows us to free ourselves from our self-created mental, emotional, psychological suffering, and to find a peace and a genuine well-being and ease in ourselves, in life, and to know ourselves fully, and the freedom that comes from that, the inner freedom that comes from that.
I love that term, inner freedom. Could you explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah. It's one of those terms that does require unpacking. So by inner freedom, I mean, and I think it's good to contrast it with its sort of either its opposite or its cultural. There's a lot of, like, I live in the United States, even though I'm from England, there's a lot of talk about the freedom of the individual and freedom of our right to do whatever we want. And it's not that kind of freedom. It's an inner freedom in that, how to best say it? When we cultivate awareness and we learn to abide in that clear knowing quality of mind, then the conditions of life, although they affect us, the joys and the sorrows and the highs and the lows and the pains and the tribulations, there's a sense of inner peace or well-being or capacity to hold, the ups and downs of life, and to find a sense of, or to know and to live in a sense of ease that's not rocked by the outer circumstances. So it provides an inner kind of balance. So, I have chronic back pain, I have neck pain, definitely circumstances in my life can be challenging. I have a health crisis in my family this week. And yet there's a sort of sense of, because of learning to abide in this presence-full awareness, there's a certain kind of place of peace that doesn't get tossed around so much. Even though I care and I respond and I might hurt and I might react, there's a sense of inner peace, actually, that for the most part is accessible. Not always, but for the most part.
So now, you weren't always on this path of mindfulness and meditation. And my sense is it's important to bring this forward, because of if someone's listening, and I just heard it last week, actually. I was at a wonderful event here locally, which was a combination of yoga and sound therapy. And it was fantastic. And two of the people beforehand had been talking, and one of them said, like, I don't have time for all this mindfulness stuff on an ongoing basis. And I know I certainly keep up a meditation practice, but it's not 100% daily faithful. I find that I'm a lot more even keel when I do. And that may be another way of accessing that peace. But if it seems esoteric to somebody who's listening, could you share a bit about your story and how you came to the very, practical understanding of why this matters so much in your own life, and why it matters for you to teach it and share it in the world?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Northern England in a working class neighborhood, and moved to London. It was the height of the punk era, which was really fun. I was a punk rocker, and I was definitely an anarchist and very politically active and a rebel. I squatted houses. There was a big squatting movement, which was like an Occupy Wall Street, except we occupied houses for the poor and the homeless. And so I was very engaged with, but I was very much sort of oriented towards the suffering in the world, the suffering of society, blaming the government and corporations and anybody I could lay my hands on, including my family. And I was very judgmental. And I was, as people can be, I was very anguished. I was in a lot. I didn't feel much inner peace. I had a lot of negativity, reactivity. I had a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-judgment. I was very critical. And I was unhappy, and I was searching, and I, as a young person, you look for wherever you can find it. For me, it was politics, and it was socialism and anarchy, and that was kind of fun and wild, and it was a good outlet for a while. But it didn't resolve my unhappiness, and I started looking at different spiritual things, and I was kind of clueless, really. And I just stumbled upon a meditation center in the East End of London, which back then was rare. In the mid-'80s, there was not a lot of meditation going on. Certain mindfulness was never unheard of. Buddhism was considered kind of weird, cultish thing. But I really trusted the people I met there. They had a sense of dignity, a sense of presence, a sense of calm and kindness. And I was like, oh, these people have something. I want to know what they're about. And so I learned, they were teaching mindfulness meditation, and they were teaching a loving kindness meditation. And I took very much to both of those practices. And they were sort of eye-opening as meditation can be, because what meditation does, at least this kind of meditation, mindfulness, vipassana, insight, is you're turning the lens of attention inwards and studying your own mind and your heart and your body and your reactions and attitudes and views. And you're really looking at, both, what what's going on inside. Why are you unhappy? Like, why are you feeling stressed and ill at ease, and what brings about genuine ease and well-being? And so it just totally spoke to me. So it was very pragmatic. It was very accessible. It made sense. And I dropped out of college. I ended up going to Asia, studying with different teachers. Eventually, that led me to the States. There's a lot of teachers out here on the West Coast, California. And that's been sort of a lifelong journey of really exploring the mind, meditation, and again, looking at this real, the cornerstone of, what are the causes of suffering and happiness, and how do we release one and cultivate the other? And, of course, that's a never-ending pursuit. But over time, when one does that work, which is kind of a deep, I call it like the trench work, like you do deep digging into your being, into your soul and mind and its habits. And over time, there's some resolution, there's some understanding comes, and one learns to access a greater sense of well-being. And then about 20 years ago, I was asked to start teaching, and so I began sharing that, and the rest is history.
and here you are, and
here I am.
Life has been built around it.
Right.
Just because I brought it up for that person who's listening and thinking, well, how do I make time for all this introspection? That's not my natural default. It's not how I think I'm geared. And please understand that I'm not trying to do anything crazy like hack mindfulness here.
Right.
But I just did air quotes just for the, how can somebody who's feeling ill at ease, who's feeling stressed, who's feeling like their environment and maybe even the world, if not their immediate family or surroundings, is out of control, how would you bring somebody into it, and where would you begin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great question, and it's true for many people. If you've got kids and a job, or two jobs, or three, multiple jobs, as many people do these days, it's hard. There's a lot of stress, and there's, in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're struggling to survive, meditation and mindfulness is not going to be a high priority. It's getting a paycheck, paying the rent, feeding the kids, getting to school. And I understand that that's a lot of people's reality. And often people say, well, I don't have time to meditate. That's really a luxury. And in one way it is. And, I think one of the reasons why mindfulness has spread so quickly, partly in response to the stress we're all feeling. There's a sense of ever increasing time scarcity. We're all feeling frazzled by technology, emails, and just the relentless onslaught of that experience. And there are ways to cultivate mindfulness that take 10 seconds. You can just, like, if we all just, for right now, let's all just take 3 slow, mindful breaths. Right, just that, right? I can immediately, and I'm a long-term meditator, just doing that in the middle of a conversation, or it could be sitting on a bus, or it could be lying in bed, or you could be doing that in the shower, or, standing in line at the grocery store, or waiting for the bus, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't take that long to pause and to encourage yourself to be present. In this case, we were doing it to the breath. It could be listening to sounds. It could be, when you're, chopping vegetables to make your dinner. It could be just being present to that. When you're walking up and down the stairs at work, it could be just being present to that physical activity. So the good news about mindfulness practice is it's really, mindfulness is simply attention. It's clear awareness of what's happening as it's happening. And I think the reason why there's such a desperate hunger for these tools or these ways of being is because we've lost technology, particularly smartphones, has sort of evaporated all the in-between moments that we used to, we used to walk down the street and walk down the street. We would stand at the bus stop and just look around, we would sit in a cafe and drink our tea, and we would go for dinner with a friend and just have dinner. Now, all those activities, they're mediated by checking our phones, getting pings, checking our Instagram account. And so someone once put it beautifully. She said, when I was a kid, so my age, 50s, we used to just spend a lot of time looking around at stuff. We just lie in the garden, look at trees and look at the sky and kind of space out and kind of chill out. And she said, I grieve for my teenage kids. They never have a moment where they just look around, because they're either doing something or they're on their phone or they're facing a screen. And so really partly where we can cultivate mindfulness requires a certain choice. It's a choice to, when I'm standing in line at the bank and I have 30 seconds to wait before the next clerk is available, can I be present and just notice my body standing, breathing a little, or do I get out my phone? Or I'm sitting in a cafe waiting for a friend, they're 5 minutes late. Do I just sort of look around, and just enjoy that moment, or I'm on my phone checking email or whatever? And I think partly these days we need a lot of digital hygiene to resist the temptation to distract ourselves with technology and just be present, walking the dog, and not on our phone, or out for dinner with the kids and not on our phones. I'm not saying phones are the enemy, because phones can be great and you can learn meditation on an app, which is fantastic, on your phone. But the point is we can be mindful doing anything. And so I'll often say to students, take 3 or 5 things you do every day, usually mindlessly, thinking, but usually we're either on our phones or we're thinking, worrying about the next thing. So what if you had, every day you take a shower, you clean your teeth, you make a cup of coffee, you walk the dog, and you make a sandwich for work or whatever, right? If just those 5 things, you just said, okay, I'm not going to be worrying and thinking and planning and all the stuff I usually do. I'm just going to be present to the heat of the shower, the smell of the bread, the taste of coffee. That is cultivating attention. And if we start to do that through the day, we're building this muscle of awareness. And then, of course, meditation is like the lab or the gym, where you're really strengthening that quality in a very structured way. So you might not have time to meditate for half an hour, but you have time to be present to a whole host of activities, including driving, conversations, cooking, house cleaning, etc. And they can be beautiful ways to cultivate presence if we don't do it with rushing and judging and multitasking and all of that that we normally do. That was a long answer.
I welcome long answers. It's a long interview, and you had me going to a number of places there, because it got me to thinking about really what you're talking about is this habit of distraction, and the habit of, and then many times, like, I talk about numbing quite a bit. So like numbing it's just even something menial, like being in the line at the grocery store. What could be more mundane than that? So the urge to dig into the purse or into the pocket for the phone in order to scroll or catch up on, see what's in the inbox, is incredibly strong, because, and this may be, I want to say cultural, and when I'm saying cultural, I'm meaning, like, I live in Toronto now. I'm Toronto born and bred, and Toronto is a go, work all the time. And part of the reason I took 9 years of time out in the western part of Canada was that that was too much my nature to be that way. So I changed my environment and went after a more nature-filled, outdoor-filled life. And now that I'm back in that environment for 5 years, I notice a lot of my habits had been unwound. So, and then we have the common environment of the technology, which is cross-cultural at this point. It's magnetic, and it keeps us, I think it's a sense of being out of body, like up in your head and out of your body, if not completely up and out altogether. You're just not there in that present moment.
Mm-hmm.
One of your chapters in your book is about embodied awareness. Can we break that down a little bit as far as?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I say we live from the eyebrows upwards most of the time. We're in our heads, we're in our worries, thoughts, plans, memories, judgments, or just spacing out. And, of course, the mind is an amazing thing, and we need to plan and structure and strategize and learn from our experience and all of that. But we're based mostly on autopilot, what in neuroscience they call the default mode network, which is mostly rumination about ourselves, usually future-oriented, slightly negative, worrying, anxious, anticipatory thoughts. Not productive, not the kind of thoughts that would be useful if we actually are planning, scheduling, and structuring, but mostly just this sort of meandering mind that's slightly negative, and that takes up a lot of energy. And when we're in that space, we're daydreaming, we're not present. We miss the beautiful spring day as it is here in California. We miss the glee of our children playing in the park or coming home from school or whatever it is. And so we need to train how to be present. And the easiest way to be present is in the body. The body is always in the present. Our physical experience is happening now. Our sensory experience, like right now, I'm hearing a plane fly by. That means I'm in the present. I hear the bird song, I'm in the present. I feel the achiness in my legs from sitting today. That gets me present. I feel the heat in my body, my breath moving. That gets me in the present. So the body is an amazing refuge, place to ground our attention. It's usually calming when we put our attention in the body, unless the body's in pain or in distress. And it's always available. So one of the practices I teach in the book and teach in my retreats is walking meditation, where you simply are present to the physical act of walking, which sounds sort of mundane, which it is. And the reason we don't pay attention to walking is because the brain knows how to do that, does it by itself. And so we start thinking about other things. The problem with that is, we walk a lot in the day, if you're walking between work and school and whatever. When we can learn to be present in the body, say walking, every time that we walk between meetings, between jobs or school, shops, whatever, that is a time that we can be present, we can ground, we come out of the spinning, ruminating, worrying, and settle into the body that's usually moving at a slightly slower rate. So back to that conversation about don't have time to be present. We have plenty of time to be present to our physical experience. Like right now, as you're sitting or wherever you are listening to this, driving, walking, lying down, can you be present to your body as you listen, right? And all the physical things you do in the day, from getting dressed to, washing your hair, to making dinner, to gardening, right? Those are times we can ground attention in the body or the breath. And that allows us to be present, come out of the habitual cycle of rumination, and actually have a much more pleasant moment-to-moment experience. It's also regulating for the nervous system, allows some of the stress to calm down, cortisol to calm down, etc. And it's free and it's available, and you can do it in any moment, no matter how busy you are.
Even though it's free and available, why does it seem so hard? What are some of our obstacles to that we need to be, that would be helpful to be aware of, so that we know that it's not just us. This is part of the journey. I think that I hear from clients and people in the Free Your Inner Guru community that, I find it very hard to meditate. There must be something wrong with me. And it becomes deeply personalized.
Yeah. Well, I think I explore this a lot in the book around, the reason mostly we don't want to be present. There's this cartoon that I think sums it up. There's a picture of a woman standing in line, and in front of her is a family with a bunch of screaming kids, and she's got this sort of like, you know, like annoyed look on her face, and the thought bubble comes up, says, I want to learn to be in the present moment, but not this moment. More like a moment at the beach. And that kind of sums it up. We want to be present if the sun's shining and our kids are happy and it's a beautiful day and I don't have to go to work. But if I have to go to work and stand in line and my body's hurting and my heart's aching and, you know, and I'm stressed, I don't want to be present. I'd rather check out, think about vacation or whatever way we kind of, you know, zone out. And that's really key. And one of the reasons we don't want to be in the body, because often the body is not actually that pleasant. We get tired, we get achy, we got physical injuries, we got chronic pain, we're hot and sweaty, or, you know, any number of reasons where, you know, we're out of breath.
It's humid.
Humid, right, where you are.
Right, that's my thing. It's like, wow.
Like, who wants to feel that? I'd rather, you know, look at my, you know, Instagram account. So, because it takes us out of the unpleasantness, and I explore this a lot in the book around, you know, as you know, creatures, we want pleasure and we want to avoid pain and unpleasantness, and that's totally natural. And yet life's full of pleasure and pain and joy and sorrow, and mindfulness is a radical turning towards and meeting and allowing and accepting whatever's here, whether it's, you know, beautiful or sweaty or happy or sad or, you know, invigorated or painful. And so this is why the word suffering is in the title, and suffering is not a very popular word. And
it did raise an eyebrow, I gotta say.
It did raise an eyebrow, right? And because you know, there's an equation, suffering, how's it go? Suffering equals pain times resistance.
Yes.
Suffering equals pain times resistance, right? There's plenty of pain in life. Physical pain, emotional pain, relational pain, you know, ecological pain, you know, just different dimensions. When it becomes suffering, when and how it becomes suffering is really the choice point. And mindfulness gives us the awareness to see we have a choice. Like, so I have chronic back pain, and, you know, nobody wants back pain. It's not pleasant, sometimes hurts, generally very uncomfortable. But I don't need to suffer around it if I'm not fighting, contracting, hating, blaming, judging, self-pitying, right? That's all extra to the sensations, which are usually kind of this dull, achy, throbbing, burning kind of sensation. So when I'm mindful and just present to the achiness of the pain, it's just achiness. It's unpleasant. I don't like it. I don't want it. But I'm not suffering around it. I'm not making a drama out of it. I'm still fine. I'm still at ease and peaceful, even though there's something there that I don't like. And that's a great metaphor. And it's also a training for how to be with life. Because there's plenty of stuff we don't like in life, like traffic, like noisy neighbors, like irritating bosses, like annoying political figures, like, you know, you name it. But we don't have to be miserable just because they're happening. We have this view, I'll be happy when, you know, my political party gets voted in, when my body's happy, my kids are finally, you know,
when I have enough this, that, the other thing, money.
Right. Money, success, fame, you name it. And we forget that actually happiness is available and the absence of suffering is available when we can find peace with whatever's here, which means we can be present and accept and allow and respond wisely to whatever's here. It doesn't mean we become passive. It just means if there is chronic pain, well, I'm going to notice that, feel that, accept that, because that's how it is. And to do anything else is actually just adding suffering onto the pain.
So can we layer on a couple of the other topics you address in the book? One being our negativity bias, which, as I'm listening and thinking about bringing that into the conversation, it seems like mindfulness and meditation can be like a pattern interrupt on negativity bias, which is something that we all have, but also the idea of the being at cause.
Being at
cause, like the causality of things.
Right. All right. So let's take the first one. So negativity bias. So this is I love this term that comes out of psychology and neuroscience that the brain is hardwired to scan for immediate threat and survival needs. And it's how we survived, in the jungle. It's how we survived, dealing with all kinds of predatory threats as a species. Now we don't, we're not about to be attacked by, a lion or a grizzly, unless, of course, you're hiking up north of where you are. But our nervous system acts like that. We're constantly looking for what's wrong, what's problematic, what's going to be a threat. And so that attunes us to the negative in the environment. The media does a very good job of mostly focusing on this negativity bias. Bad news sells. Where it becomes particularly problematic and painful for ourselves is we turn that negativity bias towards ourselves. We look at all of our faults, what's wrong with us, how we're not smart enough, not slim enough, or strong enough, or smart enough, or cute enough, whatever the story is. We look at all what we think of as deficiencies and our foibles and inadequacies, and so we see ourselves in a very distorted lens, usually negative, usually critical. And I talk a lot about the inner critic, because that's such a tremendous source of unnecessary suffering. And so it's only when we start to be mindful and self-aware, we start to see, oh, look what I'm doing with my attention. I'll be sitting in a cafe and I'll look around the room and I'll notice I'm just looking at all of people's faults and foibles. And that's a really negative, unproductive, and unkind thing to do. How about I look around and see the goodness in people, see the nice way the barista smiles at the customer, or the way, somebody's helping somebody, or somebody just walks into the cafe with great poise and presence. And so one of the lines that I love about the teaching that I studied in Buddhism, this line from the Buddha where he says, whatever the mind frequently dwells and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind and the heart, which is basically the genesis of negativity bias. Whatever we focus on, that becomes a habit. And what becomes a habit, that's what we do. And we need to see, well, is that habit creating well-being for myself or others or not? And the negativity bias, the judging mind, whether it's judging ourselves, criticizing others, that's clearly a good example of that really doesn't work so well. It's fine to have a critical mind when it's needed, but not this general, pervasive, ongoing negative lens that we see the world through distortion.
At the risk of jumping right into pop culture self-help, that seems to me like a deeper layer of what a lot of us know as the law of attraction, right? Like where the thoughts are driving the habits driving the doing driving the results. So we can look back at the thoughts for the results. Mm-hmm. Does that work in that paradigm? Is that?
Yeah, in the way that you described it, yes, I think the law of attraction, as much as my limited understanding of it, I think to some degree that principle is at work, that if we say focus on, don't lose my house, don't lose my house, don't lose my house, don't want to be laid off during a downturn, don't want to be laid off, that of course is creating a lot of negativity in the mind, negativity bias. And so, which affects the body, affects the heart, affects our perspective. And so, it's similar in noticing where we incline and really just asking, is that inclination healthy or not? Is it onward leading or not? So I differ somewhat from the mind having the ultimate power over what we attract into our lives, because I think the mind is a very small, limited thing compared to life and the universe and all the other laws that are going on. But I do think it makes a difference if we are always orienting towards negativity. That's what we'll see and probably experience to some degree.
And respond to or react
Yes.
to is probably more because and so there's an interesting tie there. How can we use some of the wisdom of meditation to turn this mirror on ourselves, see that negativity bias, see where we are probably, I'm sensing a big personal responsibility piece, but then you don't just want that to become more beating up on yourself, more negativity. Mm-hmm. In the book, you talk about in the section about, mindfulness of the heart, self-compassion and the role that has in being true, our authentic selves in the world, being vulnerable, but being compassionate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that in, because there's an important section in the book when I explore the body, the heart, the mind, and the world. And to summarize that section really, for me, what mindfulness reveals is, it reveals our humanity, our humanness. And the reality of being human is life isn't easy. Even if your life is easy, it's still not easy. You have a body that gets aches and pains. It ages. You have, we're always at risk of losing things, losing loved ones, or losing health or vitality. We get sick. We have a mind that's, sort of irrational and often out of control. So there's a lot of vulnerability about being human. We could, dear friend of mine's mother one day was incredibly happy, big family party. The next day, near fatal stroke. She's in a coma and she won't recover. And I saw her last week, and it was the happiest family gathering I've seen in a long time. And then the next day, boom. So mindfulness is, helping us meet the truth of the human experience, and that one part of that experience is that it's vulnerable, and the appropriate response, I think, to vulnerability and the tenderness of being human is kindness, is compassion. Because it's hard. It's often hard. Sometimes hard just getting out of bed if you have mental health issues, if you have anxiety, depression, which huge swathes of the population do right now, or have any other kind of challenging condition, physical, mental, or otherwise. And so the judge will come and say, well, you're stupid, you should have done better, you made a mistake, you could have, you don't need to be like that, look at everybody else who's doing great. Compassion is more meeting the experience with care. It's like, yeah, this is hard. It's hard to feel depressed or feel anxious or feel lonely or feel like confused about where you are in your life. And when we can meet that experience with kindness or with care or with friendliness or with compassion, it's a bit like the kind-heartedness infuses mindfulness with a much greater capacity to hold and be with experience. And then when we can be with experience and hold it with care, we can then be much more responsive. We can go, oh, okay, so yeah, this is hard. It's hard to get out of bed in the morning because I feel depressed or sad or lonely. Okay, so we feel that and we kind of process that. And then it's like, okay, so what's needed? Well, actually, I know when I feel like this, like I did this morning, like I know it's good for me to get out and take a vigorous hike in the woods. So I got up, took a vigorous hike, wake my system up. And it's like, oh, now I feel a little brighter. Okay, and I'm a little more ready to meet the day, and I'm ready to get to work and see clients or whatever else I'm doing. So it's in a mature spiritual practitioner, mature person, these qualities of kindness and mindfulness are integrated. So we meet ourselves and life with a kind attention, with a warmth, with a loving presence, which is a beautiful thing to give to ourselves and to the world.
A couple of years ago, I was on my way to, it was a photography workshop. I flew to Eastern Canada to see one of my mentors, and I grabbed one book off of my shelf. And that book, it's called Power versus Force. Have you ever heard of that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, it's David R. Hawkins, and it's this big, heavy, even the audiobook is, you wouldn't want to listen to it while you're driving or operating heavy equipment. It's really dry. However, it's what jumped off, out at me to take. And I'm on the plane, and I was going there. There was some real synchronicity in returning. I think I've been to, his name is Freeman Patterson, who I'm hoping to get on the podcast at some point. And he does workshops, and most of which are photography, most are spirituality. And I was going out there to heal some trauma. And he runs an environment that I'm deeply trusting of. And I got on the plane and I opened up this book, and it opened up to a page. So one of those page openers, and it opened up to a page on on compassion. And there's this whole scale of human emotion, and it's the scale of consciousness. And within it opened up to the section on shame, and it said that shame is the closest emotional experience to death, that it is so low on the scale that it is even guilt and anger is more empowered than the feelings of shame. And then it went into a few paragraphs on compassion as the antidote to shame. Mm-hmm. And this is emblazoned in my memory. And the message that I picked up of that was, it was simple kindness to oneself is the most healing and transformative power there is. And that's what I took into that retreat. Mm-hmm. Looking at this self-compassion, trying to look at life and events in life and challenges, as well as successes and happiness, through a compassionate lens. And I'll tell you, it changed the way I saw the world.
Yeah, well, it will, because you're one, shifting out of that negativity bias. Shame is a really raw, tender, painful experience. We collapse, we feel bad, we feel deficient, we feel empty. And, it's painful. And, the only appropriate response to pain is kindness, because it sucks. It's horrible. Nobody wants to feel shame or, depressed and I think we overlook it because it's so simple. Maybe we psychoanalyze why we've got shame, and it's, because of intergenerational trauma and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, that's all true. And it's good to understand why and the causes and conditions for things, back to your earlier question. But there's an interesting framework for understanding experience. It's 3 questions. Well, it's really 2 questions. What's happening now, and how am I relating to it? Right? Mindfulness reveals what's happening now, and also reveals how we're relating to it. But the kindness is one of the attitudes, like you're saying, that we can bring to experience. And if we can find, and when I say kindness, because sometimes people say, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, if we can find a sense of friendliness or warmth or acceptance or understanding, then we're well on our way to finding the capacity to hold that experience and not suffer with it, right? Because as soon as we engage awareness, and particularly if that awareness is infused with kindness, then we have a tremendous capacity to hold even the deepest, darkest experience. I went through some early pre-verbal traumas, and it went through really painful states of terror, annihilation, deep depression, suicidal thoughts. It was pretty bleak times. And I'd been meditating about maybe a dozen years, something like that. So I had some kind of, stability or some skills to draw on. And what remained, I was really flattened by this eruption of this early trauma. And what remained was the qualities of awareness and compassion. Like I without trying, because of having trained my mind and heart for a while, I did have the capacity to hold it with a kind attention. And as bleak as it was and as hard as it was, that made it all workable. Didn't make it pretty, didn't make it pleasant, but it made it helped me to not add suffering onto the pain. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And that's what we can bring to both the small, sorrow, or to, really deep challenges in life.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very, very powerful. Because I think what I was hoping you were going to say is that it took it away. And it doesn't sound that right. Like that's the fairy tale that archetype of, I did this and it took it away, which is ultimately what we're looking for in our distraction and our numbing. Right? Take the grocery store, take the pain of the mundane away. Take the pain of the million things that I need to do between now and bedtime, which will never get done. Take me away. Right. But that's not really, so this is where this conversation and your work is a bit counterculture. Mm-hmm. Because I think we have, especially in North America, we have this idea that if we do 1, 2, or 3, or get all hyped up, power through everything, and it's all going to be well in the end as long as you think good thoughts and not ever have to face a great big challenge or trauma.
Right. Yeah. We all want the happy ever after story. We want the fairy tale, spiritual mythology of, and I thought that too. I was, wanting to get enlightened so I wouldn't have to feel and deal with the messiness and the painfulness of life, right? And what in the end happened was to awaken, we need to integrate all of ourselves. And if there's trauma in the system, that needs to be integrated, as well as everything else that's been suppressed and stuffed and avoided. And so, to be careful what you ask for, and what that experience did bring, it didn't make the pain go away. It didn't make the suffering go away or the pain go away, but it blew open my heart. And since that time, I've been able to access a very profound level of compassion for myself and for others in a way that I'd never been able to access. My heart, I would say, was sort of closed, partly just keeping, pain and numbness down. And when we go through that kind of eruptive experience, rupture, it tenderizes us, tenderizes my heart, and allowed me to access, beautiful qualities of care and compassion, and for my own and others' vulnerability, which, I'm forever grateful for. Even though it was painful in the moment, it led to some beautiful, not just qualities, but also ways of being and ways to relate to life and to other people's suffering, which I work with a lot.
And it speaks back to that idea of the compassion, because it comes from the heart that we're talking about, into being that force for the transformation that a lot of people are seeking. Yeah.
I was speaking last night, as I mentioned, and this phrase came to me. The fourth part of the book is finding peace in the world, but it's really it's encapsulated by the shift from self-centeredness to service, to focus, to overly focus on ourselves. And definitely mindfulness can be introspective, but once we do that inner work and start to free ourselves up, we're much more capable to help others, to serve, to do good work in the world. And that's really the point of deep spiritual practice. Ultimately, is we step outside of the prison, the confined of our small self-centered world, and realize we're deeply interconnected, deeply interdependent, and our work becomes therefore acting in alignment with that sense of connection, and helping others and helping the world in whatever small and large ways that happens.
What if that feeling is that I can only help a small bit? how does mindfulness and the individual relate to sort of I want to use the word, the collective consciousness, or
Yeah.
the collective good, especially right now in these times?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think in truth, I think in truth, for the most part, we can only influence a small bit, right? A small, limited people around us. Maybe we have a public office position where we can influence a little more. But even then, whatever position, everybody's limited. And everybody, you talk to the CEO of any Fortune 500 company and they say, I don't have any power. Either the shareholders have it or the board has it, and so there is a general sense of feeling powerless. Even a powerful politician, I mean, clearly if you're at the top of that ladder, you can influence more change, but still it's limited. And so, but we can all do something. We can all influence the people immediately around us, our family, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, our strangers. And so that is, since we are interconnected web of life, influencing one small thread of that weave of life influences, the whole tapestry. And so we just have to do what we can in the immediate spheres that we operate in, because that's all we can ever do, and trust that is an important contribution. What one person does make a difference because we are connected. So, and then hopefully, if we're doing good work, hopefully that can ripple out in ways seen and unseen. We never can know where our work might take us. I'll often hear 10 years later, I taught something, said something, did something, and that influenced this person's whole career shift and them starting a nonprofit or who knows what. And so we never know what the ripples of influence that we can do from good intention and good work.
And conscious, and then this is part of the conscious impact versus being on autopilot. You think of, even in the context of parenting, as an example. It comes up in my coaching practice often that sometimes the limitation that is coming up is something because of something that was said to them as a child that just happened to penetrate. And it was an unconscious moment from the person in the position of power and authority in that relationship. And they were probably having one hell of a day and didn't mean to say, fat, stupid, this, that, whatever it was. It just went in and it locked and it loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at times like that I'm struck by. It brings me back around to looking for increased self-awareness, increased mindfulness. That points us back, because you just don't know in any given moment what that shitty thing you did just caused the ripple effect of, or what that kind thing you just did caused the ripple effect.
Right. And that's
down to the moment.
Yeah. And it down to the self-awareness in the moment. And whether that's, as you say, with parenting or spouses or stranger in the street, the ripples can be long and deep, and it behooves us all to cultivate awareness, cultivate kindness. And, we all doing the best we can. Of course, we mess up and we fail and we, make mistakes, and then it's part of being human. We try to not judge that, but just simply learn and, pick up the reins and keep going. That's the human life.
So let's this is feeling like the conversation is starting to just kind of all weave together.
Mm-hmm.
If there was one or two things that, if you had a listener's rapt, captive attention, and they were listening to this and feeling like, I could do with another attempt at a mindfulness practice, or someone who's in a mindfulness practice and wants to take it to, the next level of awareness. What do you tell your students? Let's be students of you for a couple of minutes here as we bring the conversation to a close.
What do I tell my students in the context of meditation, or just like if I'm giving them like my parting words to them kind of thing?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah. Or addressing any big themes that you see coming up.
Yeah, hard to narrow it down, but I'll take a stab. People often ask me this at the end of podcasts, like, what do I want to leave people with? Or there's one thing that I want people to take away from the book, which is sort of kind of similar to what you're asking. I would say that to remember that mindfulness, which is awareness, is an innate quality within us all. And it's like this shining jewel that's often covered in clay, that we have the potential and skill to cleanse the jewel, to allow that jewel of awareness to shine, that we can cultivate it in any moment, no matter how busy we are or how stressful our life is. And that when we can cultivate that quality through mindfulness, through attention, through intention, we can, as I kind of coming back full circle to the beginning of the discussion, we can begin to turn our attention to what genuinely brings about well-being moment to moment, and what causes or adds to the burden of this moment, what adds to the stress or distress, and knowing that the clarity that comes from awareness allows us to unhook, disengage, disidentify, and find peace or ease in relationship to whatever's happening. And that's always available. Awareness is our birthright that we can always access. So that's my 2 cents.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And you make it sound 100% worthwhile, sort of stopping that default automatic loop that's playing, to step down out of that into our bodies and into this freedom, actually, into that inner, that sounds like inner freedom to me.
Absolutely. Always available.
Well, thank you very much for your time, for your book. I just did a Facebook Live in this crazy 100 days of Facebook Live thing that I'm doing. And I was saying that this is a book that, while I've read it for the purpose of sitting down on a timeline to sit down with you, I intend to go back to the chapters that jump out of me, much like at that other book, and do some of the exercises as a part of my meditation or mindfulness practice. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And it definitely, I recommend it for both people who are new to mindfulness, but also people who want to who are experienced and want to just get back into that deeper dive of it and understand some of these old, very old, time-tested principles behind it. It's good we don't get to hear about that as much as I would like. And that's part of why this podcast exists, actually. So thank you for bringing that here today to our shared space.
Thank you, Laura.
If people want to find you online, what's the best place that they can go?
Yeah, so my main website is markcoleman.org. That's MARK Coleman, COLEMAN.org, and has all kinds of information about my books, and I teach a lot of retreats and mindfulness teacher trainings and nature meditation teacher trainings and all kinds of activities, some writings on there. So please go to markcoleman.org and you'll find everything you need about me and my work.
All right, and I will leave that link in the show notes for easy access. It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Take care.